get my 6. I did a super close-up for you that time. There's the sun, isn't that nice? Starting to go down, so the veil is growing thin, and we're right inside the tree line where forest and field meet, and we're getting very close to Halloween. As of this recording, it's October 24, and I'm going to tell you now, so you can click away if you don't want to hear it. I'm actually reading the story that coincides with October 24 from October Nights, 31 Tales for the Halloween season by this guy. You can get it on Amazon, print, or Kindle. You can get it from our Etsy store in print, and it comes autographed, personally autographed by me, if you do it that way. I didn't read the story last year for October 24, but I'm going to this year. There were 4 or 5 that I had to skip because they were just not so suitable for this platform. But YouTube has since eased their restrictions with a lot of stuff, and it's okay now, it's safe. So I'm going to read it. It's a story called Natural Selection, and yes, I have my water, because I might get cottonmouth reading it. It's not long. Take about 15 minutes maybe. So, you've heard me say before, I can only control what I say. I can't control how you take what I say. This story is about the current pandemic, so to say, but I'm not picking sides. It's really more than that. It's a story about the folly of division among human beings. I cannot figure it out for the life of me. It's like almost like it's human nature for us as human beings to try to find anything we can to divide ourselves. Yesterday, and I'm getting to the story, I just, we're at the UVA football game. We went last night. We beat Georgia Tech. It's so unfortunate that Virginia Tech lost to Notre Dame just, by a few points there in the final minutes. Okay, I'm sorry. I know we've got some Hokie fans on here. Sorry about that. But we beat Georgia Tech. We're 6-2 now. But we were tailgating. We tailgate with these people that we've been tailgating with for years, ever since we moved to Charlottesville from the Philippines, like 5 or 6 years ago. They're wonderful people. They come up from Lynchburg, group of men, group of women, and they bring trucks and trailers full of food, beverages, alcoholic, non-alcoholic. They bring a DJ. I mean, it's like you're at like a club. And they set up at 7 a.m., and the game wasn't until 7:30 p.m. Well, we didn't go down there about 3:30 or 4 because we just can't do that all day like those guys. But they cook, they serve breakfast, lunch, dinner, and it's all free. All the food you can eat, all the food you can drink. They have a tip jar, and I don't even think they use the money to cover the cost of the food and the beverages. They donate the money, and usually what they do is they'll buy like season tickets, and then they give the tickets to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America so that these kids can come to the football games. Now, they don't party with us. We don't see them. This is like all adults here. But that's where the money goes. It's just a really great group of people. And beside us, the UVA medical students tailgate. We're always like right beside each other. And then, of course, the parties end up becoming commingled. Those college kids, they get hungry and they come over. Yesterday, Dearly cooked. She cooked at the tailgate, and I think she cooked over 100 sausages. And then our friend Robbie, who does this, he grilled the onions and it's just a blast. For those of you who go to games, there's like such a major difference between going there in person and tailgating and all that versus watching them on TV. It's the experience more so than just the game. But we were sitting there yesterday, and I'm getting to the story, and this is relevant. Sitting there yesterday, and Dearly had finished her cooking, and we were eating. We're sitting there eating. We're watching the students eat, and the other, the old people like us eating. And I said to her, what I love so much about UVA football, in this experience, this tailgate thing we do. Yeah, and all of it. I love all of it. And but I said, there's about 100 people at this party right now. The med students had about 80 people. Well, yeah, 80, and then we had about 40. There's probably about 120 people. I said, right now, here at this moment, we are not divided because of our differing political views. We're not divided over, the pandemic. Should people be wearing masks? Should they be getting vaccinations? Etc., etc. Right now, there's 120-ish people here who have one common goal, and that's for our team to win tonight. And I'll point out, too, when we see other people from the other teams we're playing, we invite them to our party. And a lot of times, I've spent the entire afternoon tailgating with people from the opposing school, who comes up to Charlottesville to go to the game, and we welcome them, we feed them, and they have a blast. Because that's who Charlottesville is. All that crap that happened years ago, that was by a bunch of idiots who came in here from out of town. This is the most wonderful town I've ever lived in my life, and that's why I call it my adopted hometown. There's no other place I'd rather live. But my point is, for that day and for that night when that game's on, we're all united, and it's a beautiful thing. So this story, a lot of people are going to be like, he meant this by that. No, I didn't mean any of that. It's really about the folly of division and how we, and I think really, and I've been around the world. I've been in Europe. I lived in Asia for many years. I was in the Middle East. I think more than anywhere in the world, Americans look for reasons to divide ourselves rather than to unite. And frankly, I think it's because our lives are so soft. You might not want to hear that. Everybody's got problems, and I'm not making light of anybody's problems. We have the luxury of knowing where our next meal's coming from. It's coming from our kitchen, coming from the restaurant, etc., etc. And if we're poor, if we don't have food, the government will give us EBT cards so we can buy food. There's nowhere else like that. And so I think a lot of this stuff, a lot of our first world problems is because we don't have any real ones. All right. So anyway, we have one now. It's the current pandemic. And with no further ado, as my beautiful bride dearly would say, let's get on with it. October 24, story called Natural Selection. Okay. And by the way, there's a playlist I created last year that has all these stories that I read, minus the 4 or 5 I couldn't, that I'm getting to this year. I'll try to remember to put the playlist on the end of this video, but you can look it up and hear all the stories if you can't afford to buy the book. The stories are pretty good. If you want to hear me read them to you, watch the playlist, okay? Natural selection. The F word is in this story a lot, and I'm not going to say it. I'm going to just say F, okay? Frank sat in his van, his completely souped-up, wheelchair-accessible vehicle that might look like a regular Dodge Caravan from the outside, but which had the most state-of-the-art devices for the handicap that money could buy, because Frank had it. Money. Lots of it. He was rich. And he was self-made. It didn't come from government handouts, and he hadn't inherited a dime. He'd been born into the working poor, and he'd worked his ass off his entire life, the last 50 years of it, from a wheelchair, to enter the upper class. He was not elite, but his net worth was in the millions, so he and everyone who knew him felt he'd done just fine. The rally for a mask-free America was being held around the corner, across the railroad tracks, and a block up. In the park, on the corner, the same park that used to have a Robert E. Lee statue in it until the protesters took it down. Which protesters? Take your pick. Frank couldn't remember. This was Charlottesville, Virginia. They were always protesting something in Charlottesville on any given day of the week. And if you didn't like the protests going on down on the downtown mall, you could always go up to the university. Those silly kids that thought life was supposed to be fair were always having protests of some sort up there too. That's true. But today, it was the anti-maskers and that son of a whore, Damian Little, who was leading the protest. The same Damian Little that had been setting up these protests all over the East Coast. He'd finally honed in on Charlottesville, alleged capital of Antifa, declared so by a former city mayor who had had his ass handed to him in the next election cycle due to making that declaration. But hey, the man he'd been on CNN for a minute and a half that day because of it, so it had been worth it all for him. Frank had driven to Richmond 5 months before, when it was being recommended that people wear face masks when out in public to help flatten the curve, as they called it. Not stop the spread of the virus, but to slow it down so that the healthcare industry wouldn't get overwhelmed and could therefore keep up with the rate of new infections and help the people who caught it. Frank had gone to Damien's first rally, a small one with less than 50 people, to try to talk some sense into the kid. Frank thought of Damien as a kid because Frank was 65 and Damien was only 25, a bulletproof millennial. "Look," Frank had pleaded from the crowd and from his wheelchair, "you're young, you're fit, we get that, but not all of us are. It's not about you. It's about those of us over 50 and people who have underlying health issues that make us more susceptible to catching this thing and dying from it if we do." "It's called natural selection," Damien had shouted back from his soapbox without even hesitating, paying no mind to the fact that Frank was in a wheelchair. Heartless, Frank thought. "For too many years now, when Americans get sick, they take a pill," Damien continued. "When they get depressed, they take a pill. When they get fat, instead of exercising to lower their blood pressure and stave off diabetes, they take a pill." "Well," Damien said, pausing for effect, and looking around the small crowd to make sure he had their attention, and he did, "now it's time to pay the piper. Mother Nature is coming around and taking those of you old, unhealthy F words who've been hanging on to life by a pill and sucking the crap out of the healthcare system and forcing those of us who are healthy into paying outrageous health insurance premiums we can't afford for coverage we'll never need anyway because we effing take care of ourselves without pills. You can't always control everything," Frank had shouted back. "Look at me. I was a 9-year-old kid sleeping in the backseat of my parents' car when we were hit by a drunk driver. My parents were killed, and I was raised by an aunt and uncle. I haven't walked in more than 50 years. I have underlying health issues due to my injuries and my age, and I can't just go out and run 8 miles every morning to stay fit and trim. I'm pleading with you, stop this movement before it picks up momentum. It's not about you and all the other bulletproof millennials and people in good health. It's about those of us who will die if we catch this thing. All you've got to do is wear a mask, man." The small crowd in attendance were now considering Frank's point. Damien saw this, and he didn't like it, not one bit. This whole pandemic thing presented his opportunity to become internet famous. "Bullshit," Damien screamed, and the crowd turned to face him. "This man is a fraud," Damien said, pointing to Frank. "We received emails warning us about him before the rally." Damien could see the crowd was listening, and he liked that. But he didn't like the fact that he wasn't quite sure what to say next because he was winging it, making it all up as he went along. He was completely full of shit. "We know exactly who you are, old man," Damien screamed, now directly at Frank. "You were involved in a single car accident years ago because you were drinking and driving and you put yourself in that wheelchair." The crowd oohed at this, and Damien was pleased. "Bullshit," Frank yelled, and he was livid. "I've never drank in my life because of what happened to me. I put myself through college and got a master's and then a doctorate, and I was a biochemist for 40 years before retiring a self-made millionaire. You are full of shit, and no matter how much granola you eat and how many hours a day you spend in the gym, there are things outside of your control, and you're asking people to throw caution to the wind by not wearing masks, and you are going to get some good people who'd had bad things happen to them, like me, killed." "This guy's good," Damien said, drawing the crowd's attention back to himself. "But he's a fraud. We knew he was coming, and we're not going to give him any more attention. What we're going to give attention to this time is the fact that this is still America, home of the free because of the brave. And men and women died in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam and all kinds of other third world shitholes so we could have the freedom not to wear masks in public if we aren't sickly and haven't become dependent on meds to make it through our day. America, F yeah." And with that, the crowd followed in unison. "America, F yeah." Of course, the book has the actual word, just so you'll know. It was October now, and the United States was seeing over 80,000 new cases of the virus each day. People were dying in record numbers. The state of Virginia, like most states, mandated that one had to wear a mask if entering a public building or business. And here was Damien now, with his 5,000 followers in Charlottesville, East Coast capital city of protests, protesting the forced mask initiative. "America, F yeah," Damien and his supporters yelled. And Frank could hear them even though he was 2 blocks away and around the corner, and he had the windows of his van up. I'm gonna F yeah you, he said. Just wait. Frank had contracted the virus. He'd not gone to the doctor yet, and he'd not been officially told, but he knew. He'd followed the news of the pandemic closely, and he was aware of the symptoms, and he knew he had them. He'd been issued his death sentence by Mother Nature, this natural selection, as Damien called it. But he was going to go out with a bang. Charlottesville's mayors were notorious for giving the police stand-down orders during protests. Yes, this made the environment much more dangerous, and it usually led to someone getting killed, but the socialist politicians of the city could then blame everything on non-college educated white males, so there was something in it for them in making sure they didn't provide a safe environment for protesters, and they figured those killed likely fantasized about the idea of becoming martyrs anyway. Frank was more than a college-educated white male. He was a white male with multiple degrees, and he didn't come anywhere close to fitting the profile the socialists were always trying to demonize, but he figured this would all work in his favor, allow for a greater likelihood of pulling off his plan. And now was the time. The protesters were beginning their march up Water Street on the downtown mall, and Frank could hear Damien in front, leading the way. America, F yeah, America, F yeah. Frank started the engine of his van and he put the transmission in drive. He slowly pulled onto the street and made the turn. He could see Damien standing in the middle of the street, 2 blocks away, bullhorn in hand, facing in the opposite direction, his back to Frank, inciting his followers to follow him on his march. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had stormed the beaches of Normandy after all, Damien was telling the crowd, so that the generations of America who were to come after them would never have to wear a face mask in public during great times of plague. America, F yeah. Damien began walking backwards, shouting their chant through the bullhorn, his followers shouting back. No one in the crowd was wearing a mask. They all appeared to be in their 20s and early 30s, and they all looked like they lived in the gym. Beautiful people physically, but as Frank thought, a bunch of self-centered, self-absorbed bitches and pricks. Frank viewed it all as a better opportunity than he'd hoped for. He could punch the gas right now by pushing on the gas lever with his right hand, as it were, in his handicapped-situated van, and not just take Damien out, but he could gain enough speed over the distance of a block and a half, he might be able to take out some of the other protesters as well, showing these perfectly healthy millennials that they're not quite as bulletproof as they think, and proving to Damien, though he'd never lived to get it, that like Frank had told him in Richmond, you can't control everything, and sometimes bad shit just happens. Frank pushed on the gas lever and his van actually squealed its tires, looking for traction. When they found it, the van began racing forward like a cougar leaping and reaching full speed in 2 strides. Frank quickly closed the distance on his young nemesis to 3/4 of a block. Damien turned to see what everyone in the crowd he faced were looking at. He could tell by their wide eyes that it must be something important. F, he shouted when he saw the van, and there was no yeah behind it, and there had been no America just before it. Just F. The son of a whore recognizes me, Frank said to himself, and he did feel pleased, knowing that this self-centered little bitch prick knew exactly what was about to take him from the earth. And the 3:15 Amtrak was running right on schedule, and Frank had paid no nevermind to the lowering of the guard posts over the train tracks, and he'd paid no attention to the flashing of the warning light because Frank had been suffering from tunnel vision, the only thing on his mind being taking out the little bitch prick who'd led a nationwide protest against masks, leading to Frank's very death sentence, as Frank saw it. And when the 3:15 Amtrak slammed into the driver's side of Frank's van, Frank was killed instantly. And he would not have to suffer dying alone from the virus, and his insurance company would not have to pay out the nose, passing those costs, of course, on to the general population later when the pandemic was over, and the protesters who saw the crap go down stopped instantly in their tracks. F, Damien said again. Always quick to think on his feet, he simply started walking in the opposite direction of the crash to lead his followers through a different part of town. America, F yeah, he shouted through the bullhorn. America, F yeah, they responded. The end. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get it. If something like this can't bring people together, see you next time for more.